Hello everyone, and welcome to this evening's webinar. My name is Kate Spencer-Ellis, and it is a great honour to be the head of sixth form here at Forest. Our webinar this evening is about raising resilient children. And before I introduce this speaker this evening, please do bear with us if we experience any technical difficulties. We're not expecting any. The next webinar will be on Tuesday, the 18th of March, focusing on Year 7 and preparing them for revision. And this will be led by the lowest score academic leadership team. Our speaker this evening is a well-known member of the Forest community, and we are all fortunate to have access to the Wellbeing Hub and their fantastic resources. And that includes, of course, parents and carers. Alicia really blends humanity, intelligence, deep insight, expertise and experience. And she's one of the practitioners from whom I've learned the most. She is passionate about providing evidence-based advice to parents and carers, teachers, and all of us who are involved in this important business of looking after children and young people, so that we can be proactive in supporting their mental health and their well-being. Alicia works directly with children and young people, empowering them to look after their own mental health and well-being. She draws on research from psychotherapy, psychology, and neuroscience, along with her extensive experience of working as an adolescent therapist. She is a CP accredited therapist, parenting expert, very sought-after keynote speaker, member of the all-party parliamentary group for a fit and healthy childhood, author and mother. She is regularly sought after for her expert opinion by the media. Having worked with schools across the UK for more than a decade, delivering webinars, talks and workshops to parents. In 2020, Alicia created the Wellbeing Hub. It is an award-winning platform providing schools with proactive approach to supporting the mental health and well-being of young people. It's now in over 180 schools in the UK, impacting over 100,000 pupils. It's with great pleasure that I invite Alicia to take the stage.
Thank you so much, Kate. It's actually in over 300 schools now, so it's grown very quickly since you last got that. But it's wonderful to be with you. Kate, is the presentation up, or am I supposed to be doing something? Oh, there it is. Right, it looks like we're off. Well, it's gorgeous to be with you all. I'm really sorry. I have got a very croaky voice, as you can hear. We were lucky it wasn't doing this morning because there wasn't anything at all coming out. But I will sip away as we go, and hopefully we'll make it to the end. We'll see just if I'm resilient or not. So we're talking about raising resilient children. And if you look at the dictionary definition of resilience, it's our ability to recover quickly from difficulties, to adapt well to change, and to keep going in the face of adversity. It's kind of our bounce back ability. And if you look at these statistics from the World Health Organization, their latest report published in October of last year found that globally, 1 in 7 10 to 19-year-olds experiencing a mental health disorder. Suicide is the third leading cause of death amongst those aged 15 to 29. And the consequences of failing to address child and adolescent mental health conditions extend to adulthood, impairing both physical and mental and limiting health and limiting opportunities to lead fulfilling lives. And I think it's fairly shocking when you look at the number of young people who have come out of school or education, university, who are not in the workplace because of their mental health. That's a huge financial burden for the country, but more importantly, it's a phenomenal waste of our young talent. So resilience has never been more needed. As we can see, it seems to be in rather short supply. So what can we do? Well, when the psychologists first started looking at resilience, they concluded that really being resilient was all about having good self-esteem. Self-esteem is our core sense of having value, of being okay. And so as parents and teachers, we were advised to kind of praise them for absolutely everything. And we got rid of winning at sports days, and we made it all about personal bests. We ditched the numbering of sets, although even those in the bottom set could usually work out they were in the bottom set no matter what number you called it. And funnily enough, it didn't really change anything. And that was partly because often we went about it in the wrong way, which is another talk entirely, but also because actually self-esteem as and of itself is not enough to build resilience. To be resilient, we also need self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is your belief in your ability to complete tasks, to reach goals. And we also need emotional intelligence, which is your ability to use your emotions to inform your thinking, and your thinking to manage your emotions. And if we can give them all of those things, I think we give them the best chance possible of leaving our nice cozy nests as resilient, robust individuals who are ready for that, whatever the world throws at them. To reach that goal, we have to create an environment, therefore, that promotes self-esteem, self-efficacy, self-awareness, and self-management. And if we're going to create that kind of environment, we've got to be very mindful of our parenting style. So up to this, if you think about your parenting style, as parents of little ones, we are by turn sort of nurturer and nurse and confidant and admin assistant, not to mention cook, cleaner and chauffeur. But as they grow up, we need to develop a parenting style that allows them to become increasingly independent of us. And that means taking little steps sideways and allowing them to take more and more control of their lives. And we need to start to take those little steps sideways probably a lot sooner than perhaps you might imagine. I often think it's a little bit like kind of dolphin parenting, We're swimming along beside them. Occasionally we just have to give them a little bat in the right direction. But actually we're allowing them to take more and more control of their destiny, their lives, their work, or their possessions, their everything. And when we do that, when we give them that kind of space to start to become more independent, the message we're giving them is actually, we know you can do this. And that's really important in terms of their self-confidence. But we do want them to start to have a go for themselves. So up to this point, we might all be forgiven for a little bit or a certain amount of helicopter parenting. But it's really, really important that we start to land the helicopter and become the dolphin, because I'm going to give you lots of reasons why, but that's just kind of the definition of helicopter parenting, is being involved in a child's life in a way that is over-controlling, over-protecting, and over-perfecting, and in excess of responsible parenting. Why do we do it? Well, I think often it's our anxiety about the future. If we're sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, if you don't get into this school and then you don't get those GCSEs, if you don't get the GCSEs, you won't get the A-levels. If you don't get the A-levels, you won't get you won't go to university. And by the way, that should be a Russell Group university. And if you don't go there, you won't get a job. And if you don't get a job, you won't get a flat. And if you don't get a flat, you won't get a partner. If you don't get a partner, I'll never become a grandparent. Oh, and suddenly our anxiety about the future means that we are over everything in the present. Sometimes we do it because I think of peer pressure, and frankly, I've stood outside enough school gates to know that as parents, we are just as guilty and just as prone to be targets and victims of peer pressure as our children are. Sometimes it's because we're overcompensating. So perhaps if we felt a little bit neglected or unloved or ignored as children, we start to overcompensate with our children. And I think if you ask any of the schools, I happen to be at the IAPS conference today, so there's well over 100 schools here, they're all saying the same thing, that since COVID, parents seem to be kind of less confident that schools are getting things right, less confident in allowing young people to become independent. So that's, it is what it is, it's cool, but let's just really think about what happens when we helicopter, so that we can just start to make informed choices about how we want to parent going forward. So the first thing is that helicopter parenting fosters a dependence on us. Now, being able to depend on somebody is really, really different to being dependent upon them. And I don't know what age your kids are at the moment. It might feel really nice to be needed right now, but at some point you're going to want them to get on with it for themselves. And at what point are you going to let go and let them do that? As a parent of older ones, I would suggest it's generally around the age of 18. But we have to set them up. We can't just expect them to just get to 18 and be able to do it. So we got to kind of take a step back from that micromanaging. There was a brilliant program a while ago now on the TV, and it was a guy who was a senior partner in a law firm. And he, for some reason, was a little bit bored. So he decided he was going to get involved in the recruitment of the next batch of interns. So HR sent him up a whole load of CVs. There was a massive pile of them. He said, I'm not going to go through all of those. So he split the pile in half, put one lot in the bin on the basis, as he said, that he didn't want anybody unlucky working for him. And then the other half he went through and he gave a few interviews out. And he had this one guy who came in for an interview. And he said for the entire interview, he was sort of looking at some point over my shoulder. So eventually I said to him, look, is there something more interesting going on the wall behind him? He goes, no. All right, okay, fine. Have you got any questions you want to ask me? So he pulls this little yellow sticky out of his pocket and he said, Mum said, and reads off these questions. So he leaves and the guy goes, he's got zero social skills. And he and he's not independent. He's not going to work with us. Sends him the thank you, but no thank you letter. A few days later, telephone rings, and it's this guy's mother. And she says, I wonder if you could tell me why my son didn't get a place on your internship. And he goes, Madam, you have just answered your own question. Puts the phone down. It's really important that we recognize that, when we make them too reliant on us, it's very hard for them to fly. And what happens is they develop this thing called learned helplessness. And I don't know about you, but I pay quite a lot of money to the AA not to have to change a tire if I get a flat tire, but I could do it if I needed to. If I, and that's the opposite of learned helplessness. I'm choosing not to do it, but I know I could. And we want our kids to know that they can do stuff. Because otherwise they're a bit like a beetle on its back, kind of flapping around, waiting for somebody to come and rescue them. And we stop them discovering their own resources. And being resourceful is a very big part of being resilient, because knowing you can do things for yourself increases self-confidence, whereas actually helicopter parenting kills self-confidence, because when you do everything for me, you give me the subliminal message that I don't think you can do this for yourself, so I'm going to do it for you. And we kill their self-efficacy when actually we really want to increase it by making them feel confident in their competence. And we can start really early. So, Kate, we're going to do that video now. Look at that little face. Even little people are capable of so much more than we often give them credit for. And I've put, well, we just flashed that there. Here's a kind of list of things that I think they should be able to do by age. So by all means, take a photograph of it, put it up on your fridge, start working through it, because especially if they're younger than teenagers, lots of them are really desperate to do the stuff that you're doing anyway. So get them involved. When they get to teenagers, you might have a bit more resistance, but actually just saying to them, look, my job is to make you independent. It's to make you so you can go and live with other people, and actually they enjoy your sharing a flat or whatever it is with you. So I'm not going to ask you to do it all the time, but it's really important that you can do this stuff. And when we do that, we give them the message that we think they're capable. Whereas if we just always do it for them, then actually we make them feel incapable. So maybe go away and ask your charges, what am I currently doing for you that you think you could be doing for yourself? As I say, with the teenagers, you might get nothing, but actually if they can do that list, then we're fine. There's a huge amount of research that came out from Harvard, the Harvard study, and it shows that children who do chores, particularly from an early age, all the way through, have less mental health difficulties. They are more successful later in life. There's lots of different benefits, but getting them involved, get them doing stuff, because I know some parents said, they have such a long school day. Well, you've got the holidays, there's the weekends, but do get them involved. Going back to that idea of the helicopter, the studies show that actually helicopter parents tend to be very highly focused on results. and achievement. So their kids get lots and lots of praise when they're bringing home the great grades and the prizes and the cups. But actually the studies show that conversely, when they don't meet parental expectation, there is an overt or perhaps sometimes more subtle withdrawal of affection. And if that's the case, then our children learn that our love is conditional. In other words, our approval comes with a price tag. It has to be earned. They have to perform. One of the biggest factors, affecting children and teenage mental health is that pressure to perform, because it drives perfectionism, which is absolutely toxic for our mental health. I mean, you will never, if you ask any eating disorder specialist, you'll never work with somebody with anorexia nervosa that doesn't have extremely high levels of perfectionism. So I think if you can give your kids a few gifts, but this is one of the most important, unconditional love. I absolutely love the bones of you. Nothing you could do, good or bad, will ever change how much I love you. I won't always like what you do, but I love who you are. And when it comes to looking at, thinking about performance, be really mindful that you're focusing on the journey, not the outcome. Now, I'm not naive enough to stand up here and say that results don't matter. They do, because they open doors. For the little ones, we say, why do you do exams? Why do we do tests? Because we need to know if the teaching's any good. For the older ones, why do we always have to do exams? Because exams open doors, and the better you do, the more doors you get to open. But there's always another door, and that's such an important message, because we know that the rates of suicide really spike around GCSEs, A-levels, and then the result stays as well. So by all means, have high expectations for them. They are all capable of really amazing things, but just don't focus on the end result, the winning, the prizes and grades. Try really hard to focus on the journey and just giving them that message that actually all you have to do is work to be a bit further forward than you were yesterday. And kind of that way we get to enjoy the ride a bit more, because if you get the journey right, not only will the results take care of themselves without putting us under intolerable pressure, but they'll also learn to deal with setbacks and failure. So you remember that definition of resilience, our ability to bounce back. And so this ability to deal with setbacks and failures is hugely important. And if you're focused on the journey, you learn to deal with it, because some days you win, some days you lose. But you're never, if your goal is simply to move yourself a little bit further forward than you were last time you did this activity, you're never going to fail on a really spectacular scale. Whereas if you can only succeed when you hit that end goal, then it's really easy to develop a fear of failure. If we go back to resilience, it's way easier to bounce back if you've learned to view failure as a temporary setback, or perhaps even an opportunity to reassess and do things differently. We have to allow children to fail. J.K. Rowling is really interesting on this one. If you ever get 20 minutes, go and Google her talking to the Harvard alumni about the fringe benefits of failure. And in it, she says, if you live a life in fear of failure, you end up living such a small life that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you have failed by default. And so it's really important, and I know it feels so counterintuitive, and we don't want them to fail and all of that kind of stuff. But actually, we have to allow it, because first of all, if we don't allow failure, ultimately what happens is we kill creativity. And creativity, so there was a American systems analyst, a guy called Edward London. He did a lot of research on people by age, whether they could be considered to be highly creative. And what he found was that 98% of 5-year-olds can be considered to be highly creative. That drops to 30% of 10-year-olds, 12% of 15-year-olds, and only 2% of all adults. And that's problematic. It's hugely problematic because actually, if you look at what the job markets of the future, the skills that your kids are going to need to thrive in those job markets, according to the Futurists, one of my favorite job titles ever, they're going to, creativity. So there are 4 things: social skills, creativity, initiative, critical thinking. We do not want to bash the creativity out of them, because creativity is not just about great literature and art and music. It's also about science, design, engineering. Everything that currently exists only does so because somebody somewhere had the imagination to believe that it could. So we really, really want to encourage creativity. Creativity, actually, interestingly, is the antidote to anxiety. You can't be creative if you're anxious, but you can't be anxious if you're being truly creative. So, and creativity comes in lots of guises. If you've got a child who's anxious, and maybe kind of getting them to do creative stuff, great. But it could just be redesigning your bedroom in your head, or or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. It could be creative thinking. So you might say to them, if you were going to eliminate a colour from the colour spectrum, which colour would you eliminate and why? If I was going to shrink you to the size of a pound coin and chuck you in a Magimix, and you've got a minute to sort yourself out before I turn the blades on, how would you save yourself? And I wouldn't do that with the really little ones, but it goes down quite well with some teenage boys. Creativity, again, is a very big part of resilience, because it's our creativity that allows us to imagine other possibilities and outcomes. So in other words, our creativity is our hope. And without it, picking ourselves up, dusting ourselves down, trying again is really, really difficult. So, we don't want to give them a fear of failure because it kills creativity, but also because if we develop a fear of failure, we start to avoid challenges, because it's better not to try than it is to fail or to be wrong. Yesterday I was up in the north. No, I'm still up in the north, actually. I haven't managed to get south yet. But anyway, I was chatting to one of the teachers, and he's one of the really big independent boys' schools. And he said, I've got kids in my rugby team who they won't take a tackle because they're frightened of failing. And then they'll tell you, oh, I've got a sore shoulder. It's like, no, you just didn't take the tackle. So that fear of failure, it doesn't just show up in the classroom. It shows up in so many different areas of life. And it's important that we give our kids the space and permission to get things wrong, because in the words of Professor Brian Cox, being wrong is the means by which we learn. And especially in the younger years, all the way through, it's just right the way through from up to probably the middle of year 11. The more we can kind of allow those mistakes, the better. Intelligent mistakes, yeah, but let them do it. And don't give them the message that they can't do it. So I remember standing in a queue for parents' evening, and I was with my eldest, whose favourite subject was very definitely not maths. She was definitely in the bottom set for it. And we were standing in the little queue, and one of her friends was standing in front, and he was there with his parents. And I heard him say to his mum, "Oh, Mum, I really don't want to go and see Mr. Wilson. I'm rubbish at maths and he doesn't like me." And his mother said, "Oh, don't worry, darling. I'm rubbish at maths too, and your dad's rubbish at maths. And as for your gran, well, she hasn't got a clue about maths. We're just not a maths family." And I was standing there thinking, I wonder what will happen when he fails his driving test. "Oh, don't worry, darling. I'm a rubbish driver. Your dad can't drive. And as for your granny, she can't drive for coffee. We're just not a driving family." We don't do that. We just say, "Oh, bad luck. When are you going to have another go? What do you think you might need to do differently next time? You just haven't passed it yet." And yet is a very, very magical word, because it's like you can move yourself forward. It empowers them to take the initiative. And that's that ask, don't tell. What do you think you need to do to move yourself a little bit further forward? And then you need the tenacity. If at first you don't succeed, tenacity is that ability to keep going. And it really is the kind of final ingredient for building resilience. So don't rescue them. We rescue them. So often we rescue them when the going gets just the tiniest bit tough. So, for example, I was out in Kenya last week, and I went to talk in a prep school there, and their end of year 8 challenge. I think most schools have some kind of end of year, when you finish junior school challenge, and theirs was climbing Mount Kenya. And for our kids, where they were, it used to be walking the Southdown Way. It's 100 miles. Anyway, the teacher was saying, she said, it's so weird. Before COVID, unless you had asthma or a proper physical, ailment that meant you couldn't climb it, everybody did it. It wasn't even a question. It was just part of what you did. Everybody did it. And she said, now we've got, parents who don't want to let their kids do it because they think they might not enjoy it. The enjoyment, that so much of the enjoyment doesn't come from doing the things that we don't like. It comes from that amazing feeling you get after you've done it. And today, talking to the staff, they were saying, oh, we've got a French trip going out. We've got 4 or 5 parents who don't want them to go on it because they think they might not like it. It's like, don't hold them back and don't rescue them from a bit of discomfort, because actually that's how we grow. It's how we learn. And we rescue them in so many different ways. If I could see, I wish I could see you, because I could ask you, how many of you have rushed in with that bit of forgotten kit after you've dropped them off in the morning? We do it in lots of different ways. We make excuses for their behaviour. We get them out of things they don't want to do. We help them with projects and revision and timetables and homework. We constantly reminding them of things that they need to do. We drive them to things they could perfectly easily walk or cycle to. We make social arrangements for them. We don't expect them to help around the house. You name it, we do it. And I always remember watching a friend of mine. It was so embarrassing. It was just excruciating. But all the kids were in a little netball team, in their netball team. And she was furious because her daughter hadn't got into the first team. So she marched onto the pitch, just kind of jabbing the coach practically in the chest like this, going, why isn't my daughter in your team? And fair play to her, the coach said, because she's not good enough yet. Tell her if she wants to be in my team, these are the 3 things that she needs to really work on. So focus on the journey, and you get to where you want. Why do we do it? Because we love them. We don't want to see them struggle. But actually, in between not knowing something and knowing something is where the struggle happens. And it's uncomfortable. And we don't want them to sit with the discomfort. But that's also where resilience grows. So sometimes we need to, of course we support them, but we want to have them just outside their comfort zone, not outside their safety zone. Sometimes we do it because we want an easy life, because frankly, it's easier than nagging. Sometimes we do it because we don't want them or us to look bad or to fail. But just remember, every single time you rescue them, you disable them and you rob them, sometimes on a small scale. So one of the housemasters at another conference, he said, I've just sent out an email to my parents, and it basically was, it's a boys' prep school. Next time your little Johnny loses his jumper, please don't send me an email asking me to look for it. Tell him it's his responsibility. He needs to come into school and he needs to go and search. And he'll probably end up talking to some of the cleaning and housekeeping staff. And he might have to chat to some of his friends. He might also miraculously find where lost and found property is kept. And if he doesn't find it, he's going to have to make a plan to get himself out of trouble because he's going to turn up with the wrong kit for the event. And if he really, really doesn't find it, then I would suggest you ask him to do chores until he's covered the cost of replacing it. And I just thought, oh, I wonder how that went down with parents. But how fantastic, because he's so right. We've got to stop rescuing them. And we do it on a small scale like that. We do it on a bigger scale. But when we do, we rob them of that amazing feeling that you get when you achieve something that you weren't quite sure you could achieve. In other words, you managed to move from the not knowing through the trough of discomfort to knowing. And, it's really, really a great, you all know, it's a great feeling when you overcome something you weren't entirely sure you could manage. And that kind of leads us sort of onto the subject of the importance of risk in developing resilience. Now, I can't see you, I can't talk to you, I don't know whether you can see me, whatever. But this next slide here, that top slide was splashed across the newspapers. It was back in August 2015. It's all about this 11-year-old who'd been left on the rocks off the coast of North Wales. Now, it turns out that this 11-year-old is actually the son of Bear Grylls, as you can see at the bottom right there, head of the Boy Scout, of the Scouts movement at the time. Also, he was an ambassador for the RNLI, Royal National Lifeboat Institute. And it was all set up as a training profile-raising exercise for the RNLI. And, perhaps not the best PR exercise you've ever come across, but if what they say about PR is correct, and nothing's better than nothing. And he got absolutely lambasted, completely and utterly slated. The same thing happened to Kirsty Allsop last summer. One of her 15-year-old, she allowed him to go off traveling around Europe with a friend, and people were utterly horrified. And she said, well, not every child is ready to do that at 15, but I completely know he was. He was good to go. He'd got all the skills, and he had an incredible time. When Bear Grylls got his kind of dressing down, he actually ended up writing to the papers to justify his decision. And he said, when we try to eliminate risk from our children's lives, we do them a gross disservice, because risks teach independence, initiative, self-reliance, resourcefulness, skills that will serve them for the rest of their lives. Very much goes back to what I was talking to at the beginning. Now, I don't think any of us would leave our kids on the rocks in a rising tide unless it was pretty safely set up with the RNLI in advance. But I do think that many of us have become way too risk averse. If you think about it for a minute, what is your attitude to risk? Is it different since you had children? If you're co-parenting, is your attitude to risk different to your partner's? And I think watching our children take risks is probably fairly anxiety-inducing for any parent. When they're little, we're doing the risk assessing for them. Does that risk outweigh the benefit? If the consequence is severe, is the probability high or low? So, for example, if your child said they were going to go tombstoning, which is jumping off cliffs, the consequences could be really severe. But if they were being taken by a professional, then the probability of the risks occurring are pretty low. And our long-term aim is to teach young people how to assess risk for themselves, not to avoid risk. And that is the same online as offline. We want them to be able to manage risk so that they can avoid harm. And ideally, we really want those skills in place before they hit adolescence, when, let's face it, they're programmed to seek new experiences and take more risks anyway. So we need to start early. And your modelling is really, really important. 70% of our behavioural learning is done by modelling. So if you're a risk taker, you're going to give them the message that it's okay, given the right risk assessment, etc., etc. If you're a risk-averse person, you're going to communicate to your children that risks are to be avoided. But if we're not prepared to take any risks, we're not prepared to use our initiative. In other words, social skills, creativity, initiative, critical thinking. It's really important that we allow them to learn to take risks and to use their initiative in a way that's thought through. As they head into adolescence, as I say, it is really important that they have learnt to do it really as much as possible for themselves. But that's a whole different talk. But of course, risk, I've showed you stuff about outdoors, and you're probably thinking it's the whole thing's about climbing trees or whatever, which I do massively believe in. Really interesting study that they did in New Zealand, actually, where they were trying to find a school that would allow kids to take risk in a playground setting. And they finally found this one school who were really happy to get involved. And, they had they were allowed to climb trees. They had boards of wood. They had hammers and nails, all kinds of stuff around the playground. And, there was a reporter going on the journey around the school. And there was this little girl up the tree. And she was like, "Oh, excuse me, sir," to the headmaster. "Excuse me, sir, can you help me to get down?" He went, "No, you got up there, you'll get down." And the reporter was just horrified. Anyway, she said, "You're not really going to leave her up there, are you?" He said, "You watch, just watch." 2 minutes later, this little girl got down the tree, was standing next to her, huge grin on her face. But actually, more importantly, what they discovered as a result of this particular project was that they had less risk. They actually had less injuries. They had much better concentration and kind of focus in classes. And that actually children were, interestingly, taking less risk, because when we sanitize their whole environment and those ridiculous kind of rubberized stuff underneath the playgrounds and all the rest of it, they then are programmed to take more risk. So they actually tend to hurt themselves a bit worse. But anyway, it's not just about the outside. Making friends is risky because we have to create intimacy, and that makes us vulnerable. And of course, we're not all born natural extroverts, but we can all learn the skills. So I was at a big group of year 12, so lower 6, and we were talking about social skills for life. And actually, it was ridiculous. We had to sit there and write lists of conversation starters. They just didn't have the skills. So, with your kids, if you're going out with another family to a meal or a pub or whatever it is, mix everybody up. Don't let all of the kids sit at one end of the table with their screens. Mix them up. Get them talking to the adults. Make sure that they could start a conversation with anybody at any time. And I always used to say to mine, "Oh, don't you find it irritating? Adults kind of fire questions at you." So the quickest way to stop that is to turn it round and ask them a question, but ask them a question that's going to lead to a longer answer. "Oh, Dad says you do this. I'd love to know how you got to where you are in your career." Brilliant question. People love talking about themselves. So get them to be really, really confident in those social skills, because it's a huge part of relationships. Sometimes they are going to fall out with their friends, and it might feel like a massive risk for us to let them sort the problem out, but we have to let them try. And, when our kids come to us at the end of the day and tell us all the drama that's gone on, there's a brilliant clip on the In-Betweeners about this little girl saying, "Well, Molly said this to Megan, and then Megan said that to thing, and then I said that to her, and she said that to him." And it goes on, and it's so complicated. And you can see this dad just going, "Oh my gosh," trying to keep up. Actually, you don't need to do that. They're trying to tell you that at the moment I'm finding relationships difficult, and I just need to say that, and they need you to hear it. So we just do that empathy stuff. Oh, that sounds so complicated and difficult. Don't say the but, and what will happen then that calms them, because you get it, you understand. Don't say, "Oh, I understand," because you don't, you're not 10 or 12 or 15 in the age of social media and all the rest of it. But just be alongside, allow them to talk to you about whatever's going on. when they're calm, you might just ask them, well, what do you think would be a good next move? Or what do you think might be going on for that other person? And with them, we're encouraging their empathy. We're encouraging them to be able to see perspective and to do that problem solving, all of which, again, build resilience. So we're going to come to the end, really. And I think, these are the stuff that we've covered, just taking that step sideways, becoming more dolphin-like, allowing them to become more independent. It's really important. And start much younger than you really think. As you saw in that little video, even tiny people are capable of becoming more and more independent. And if you are really struggling to let them become independent, if you're struggling to let them make a few mistakes, actually that's your stuff. And by all means, get some support with it, because their journey is to become independent. Our journey is to make them independent, to make them fly, to send them out, these beautiful birds, into the world. So ask them what they could be doing for themselves. Focus on that journey, not the outcome. Allowing intelligent failure, I think I've probably made that point fairly clear. And then encouraging creativity, teaching social skills, encouraging considered risk-taking. More importantly, encouraging them to become good at risk-taking. Now, I think we're on the wrong thing here, so I'm not going to stop with that. I'm going to stop there. As Forest, as Kate's already said, as a school, you are all members of the Wellbeing Hub. You can find access to it through your school portal. It's got thousands and thousands of resources on it, all designed to really support you in what I know is a really tricky journey. I've done it. I've got my own. They're in their 20s now, but it's it's not easy. And we just try and make it as simple as possible. But I hope some of the ideas I put forward today you might find interesting. You're super welcome to debate them. So by all means, shove in any questions that you've got. I think, Kate, do they go into the comments?
Yes, they do. If they've got any questions, I can't see any questions at the moment. So people may, there's so much in what you've said to digest, and I've just been riveted and actually thinking about how we as teachers can sometimes kind of imitate that helicopter sometimes and rescue and not allow them to find their own resolutions for problems, because we don't like to see young people suffering, but actually you have to think big picture, especially in the sixth form, where very quickly they're going to be fledgling and flying off. Alicia, it's been such a joy listening to you. I am so sorry that you've not been well, but I'm so pleased that you were able to take this time. And we shall say good evening to you. And I hope that everyone who's listened and watched has really enjoyed that. I will take that video clip of that little girl putting on her coat so well at Exeter with me all through the next few days. Thank you very, very much.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and take care, everybody.
Thank you.